Welcome, Northwest Faith Family and Extended Faith Family. Good to be with you today. Hey, let's just jump right in. Hey, as we have been studying together over the last several weeks, we've been going through a series that we've called How You Doing? And really what we're doing is we're dealing with our emotions and our feelings. And one of the things that we've talked about every single week is that whether you were taught it or understood it from others, what we felt is that there's a right way to feel and a wrong way to feel. That there are these good emotions and there are bad emotions. There's a way you should feel and there's a way that you shouldn't feel. And maybe we've told somebody else that before or been told that ourselves, like, hey, if you feel this way, well, don't feel that way. Feel this way instead. But we've had to admit that, well, that approach, it's just not working. And what we're finding is that it's really a bad model. Because what we're discovering is that the issue isn't, well, how are you feeling? And is that the right emotion? A better question to ask is, where are those emotions? Where are your feelings taking you? What we've looked at is that the word emotion actually means to move. And our emotions do in fact move us, but where are they taking us in large part has everything to do with, well, who's driving? Who's leading the way? Our emotions, we've discovered, that they have the ability to take us either farther away from the Lord and His people, His purposes for our life, or those very same emotions can actually lead us closer to Christ, deeper in our dependency upon Him, in greater fellowship with others. It all depends on who's driving. So in this series, we'll kind of summarize everything that we've been looking at. So in this series, we've talked about all kinds of different vehicles as an analogy. And so we talked about the minivan of shame, right? And in the minivan of shame, that thing wants to take you towards secrecy. It wants to take you towards silence and isolation. But if you invite Jesus into the driver's seat of the minivan of shame, you invite Him into your shame, He actually wants to take you towards freedom and to healing and to grace. We talked about the Suzuki sidekick of stress and anxiety. And the Suzuki sidekick of stress, man, you drive that thing with white knuckle grip because, man, you never know when that thing is going to die. And in this car, you have very little control of anything. And this vehicle wants to take you towards, again, isolation. This one wants to take you towards despair and even hopelessness. But what we discovered is when you invite Jesus right there into your stress, right there into your anxiety, man, He actually wants to take you places of dependency upon Him, a place of community with others, and ultimately a place of peace. We talked about the Buick Century of sadness, and the vehicle of sadness, man, often comes because what we once had, it was taken from us. Like life was going good, and look at all the things that I had, and all of a sudden, all of it was taken away from you, and now, where did it all go? Or you look at your life, where it is now, and you ask yourself questions like, how did I end up here? How did my life get to this place? I thought I would be here by now. I thought I would have this by now. And we're looking at all of these things. And so the Buick Century of sadness, man, it wants to take you down a road of bitterness. Like, why did this happen to me? And I'm frustrated with them. It wants to take you down roads of hopelessness. Like it's always going to be this way. It will never change. And ultimately loneliness. Nobody understands me. There is no one around me. But when we invite Jesus into our sadness and He shows us a greater presence of Himself in our life, and as we invite Him into our sadness, He leads us into deeper connection with others. We also looked at the Mazda 3 of tired and busy. Man, and this car is the car that you just drive and drive and drive and drive, and you never stop and rest. You never get the oil changed or do basic maintenance. And eventually, the engine, it locks up on you. This is the car you're driving because you think you lack something else in your life. And so you're just going and going because I got to get that thing. I got to get to that place. I got to get to that level. I got to get that achievement, whatever it is. It's just go, go, go. And I'll take care of that tomorrow. I can put that off till tomorrow. I don't have time for this. And what we find is it's just this moving target of we think we lack something, so we push and push and push to get that thing. And as soon as we get it, we've realized that the target has moved and now we're on to something else. And what's crazy is that as we invite Jesus into that vehicle, that Mazda 3 of tired and busy, man, the first thing Jesus does is he pulls that thing over, turns the engine off. It's time to slow way down. And what he helps us discover is an entirely different rhythm to live by. A rhythm including this concept of rest and Sabbath, which replenishes me physically, it restores me emotionally, and it renews me spiritually. So we've discovered through all this that it's not simply about what you're feeling, but where your feelings taking you and who's driving you. Are you inviting Jesus into those emotions so that he can redeem them and lead you closer to him and to his purposes for your life? This week, I want to end things with an emotion that all these other emotions tend to lead towards. One emotion that tends to surface no matter what other emotion you're feeling and struggling with. Can you guess which one I'm talking about? Maybe you have, and maybe as we've been going through this, you've been wondering, when are we going to get to this one? Today, I want to talk about anger. Anger. It's often called the secondary emotion because it's what rises to the top, whatever other emotion you're feeling. All of the other emotions that we've talked about can lead us to this place of anger. And I've specifically kind of held off talking about anger because I wanted to wait for it to now. I heard a great analogy about anger. That anger, as we think about it, is like an iceberg. Anger is like an iceberg floating on the water. Maybe you've seen pictures of that type of thing. And what you see above the water is anger, right? It's right there. It's easy to see. It's rage, it's fury, it's eruption, but below the surface of the anger, there are all these other emotions at play. And anger isn't even the biggest part. You know this, right? As you see like a picture of an iceberg, the largest part is often below the surface of the water. It's a larger part of the entire equation, but what's on top, what's visible, is that anger. But there's a whole host of other emotions below the surface. So below the surface of your anger might be anxiety and stress. But what everyone sees and is dealing with is your anger problem. But maybe what you really have is an anxiety problem. But why would anxiety show itself as anger? Because when you're anxious, it's oftentimes because we're not in control of something. So how somebody feels, what others do, the future, and there's something about being angry and raging, and it gives you this false sense of control. Because for just a moment, everyone is finally listening. Everyone is finally obeying. For a moment, you've got the power, or at least you think you do. So your anger issue might actually just simply be your anxiety, your stress bubbling up. Or maybe under the surface of your anger is rejection and abandonment and hurt. Someone has abandoned you, hurt you, but what shows up is anger. You don't want others to see you hurt. You don't want others to see you as needy, and you certainly don't want anyone to hurt you or abandon you again like you had before. So you get bitter, you get mean, you get angry. But underneath all of the anger is ultimately a broken heart. And your anger is simply trying to hide your hurt. On and on we could go. What we often find is that our anger is simply the surface of some other emotion at play. So this week, like every other week, we're going to look at the Psalms. And what we're finding is that David is an incredibly emotional guy. He has all these emotions we have, and he processes through them in the Psalms. And he is inviting us into his vehicle of his emotions as God leads him through all of them. And what we have seen is that the Psalms are not a prescription for, okay, hey, if you feel this, okay, we'll just do this, 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 and then you won't feel that way anymore. No, David invites us right in there, and we get to go along on his journey. This week, we're going to look at a very angry psalm. Some of you had no idea that there were angry psalms. There are, and they are real, more real and honest than you think. David is going to say some things that are probably going to make you uncomfortable, right? These kind of psalms are called imprecatory psalms. Imprecatory means curses. He's like songs of curse. Now, these kinds of psalms are often not read in church. Like, right? Aaron and Christy are probably never going to read an imprecatory psalm as like a call to worship before we lift our voices in singing together. But this psalm and others like it, they represent a part of David's relationship with God that many of us have never explored. Like, David is mad. And when I say mad, I mean he's really mad. He is angry. He is raging. And what do you do when that's how you feel? David has the kind of relationship with God that he's able to vent his anger and release that anger to God and trust him with it all. And I just wonder, as we get started in this today, do you have that kind of relationship with the Lord where you feel comfortable enough with him to be totally honest about your angry feelings? And David did. And you can have that kind of relationship. Man, I hope today as we pour into Psalm 109, one of the angriest of the Psalms, that maybe this week would be freeing for you to know that it's okay to vent your anger and to be honest with God about exactly how you're feeling. Whatever is in your mind right now, how you feel, and you're thinking, I don't know that I can say that to God, man, let's jump into Psalm 109 and see if you feel like maybe you're not so bad. Okay, so let's jump into the text together. Going to be in Psalm 109, be jumping between the NIV and NLT versions. So David, very angry. Let's listen to what he says, starting at verse 8. Let his years be few. Let someone else take his position. May his children become fatherless and his wife a widow. May his children wander as beggars and be driven from their ruined homes. May creditors seize his entire estate and strangers take all he has earned. Let no one be kind to him. Let no one pity his fatherless children. May all his offspring die. Right? My goodness. This is David. Right? Here's basically David's prayer. I hope this guy, who I'm very angry with, I hope he loses his job. I hope he dies. I hope his kids suffer because he dies. I hope he has no friends. I hope his entire family is in financial ruins. I hope his kids have no friends and that no one helps any of them. In Jesus' name, amen. That's his prayer, right? That's definitely not how we learned to pray, right? We learned to pray the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd. That's where we left David last week, right? The Lord is my shepherd. He leads me beside quiet waters. Like, that's how we learn to pray, not like this. But this is exactly where David is. David is angry, like really angry. And as we dive in here, this is really, really important to keep in mind. David was a warrior who traveled with an army. He was then a king. Listen, everything David just prayed for, David had the power to make happen. He could have easily done all these things. So as David is praying this to God, he's releasing these feelings, releasing his anger to God. As I thought about the different vehicles that I've driven that would represent anger, I think back to one of the first cars that I drove. This was my mom's car. It was a tan, almost gold color Cutlass Sierra. Now, this was a great car for a long time, but then it began to have all kinds of issues. Just about the time that I was starting to drive it, the main issue was the steering. See, the power steering would completely go out, but not all the time. Only when you wanted to make left-hand turns, right? Like, seriously, you could be driving totally fine, right-hand turn, going straight, going along, everything was beautiful. But if you needed to make a left-hand turn, oh man, get ready for a rough ride, because it was about to go really bad. I mean, it was so bad that I remember sometimes taking the long way around. I would take several right-hand turns to go left to avoid making left-hand turns. Because what would happen is, as you would start to make that left-hand turn, the power steering would just quit. And now it was a wrestling match. And it was grit teeth, and it was everything that you had to try to muscle that whole car to the left. And you got to go quick. You got to make this happen, because if you don't, man, you're not going to make the turn. You're going to hit someone. You're going to hit something. And it was bad. I mean, you had to wrestle. I mean, it was hard. In addition to this, man, near the end, I remember the radiator started going bad as well. So like it would start to overheat. So you could go for a little while, then you got to pull over, let it cool down. Go for a little while, it would start to overheat. So you got to pull it over, let it cool down. It was so bad, and this was funny. That vehicle was actually stolen out of our driveway one night. And the guy who stole it got about a half mile down the road and abandoned the thing after discovering just how much of a mess this car was. I mean, it was so hard to deal with. And it was an angry wrestle. It was an angry feeling. And that's the overheating. You got to pull it over. And listen, that's how some of your lives are. And as I think back to that car, no one ever felt safe driving this car. And nobody ever wanted to ride with me in this thing. And listen, that's what living with an angry person is like. No one feels safe. They don't feel protected. It's constantly overheating. Trying to navigate around you is dangerous, because all you're doing is grunting and yelling and raging, and it feels like you could take them off the side of the road at any time. And I can tell you, driving the Cutlass Sierra of anger, I never felt like I was in control. And that's exactly what anger has done to you. You don't feel like you're in control, and everyone riding with you is scared of riding with you. And that's where David's at in Psalm 109. He is overheating and ready to drive off the road. We don't know exactly who he's talking about, because he doesn't come out and say it. But most scholars believe he's talking about a man that we read about in 1 Samuel named Nabal. So we're going to study that section of scripture together. His name is actually called Nabal, but we're in America. We're not going to say Nabal. It'll just come out Nabal. So I'm just going to stick with Nabal. So 1 Samuel chapter 25. A little background here. Now, this is before David became king. And as we've talked about, this is during that same time where David is wandering from cave to cave to cave. He's traveling with between 600 and 700 men. They have been on the road. They have been traveling in the wilderness. King Saul is after him. King Saul is trying to kill David. And so they're hiding from cave to cave, living off the land, trying to be discreet, living in hiding for years and years. 1 Samuel 25 is where David meets Nabal. Let's look at it together. Start at verse 2. A certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats, 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. The name Nabal actually means fool. And what we're going to see is that is exactly who he was. Foolish and manipulative and harsh. Verse 4. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now, I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, man, we did not mistreat them the whole time they were at Carmel. Nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable towards my men. Since we come at a festive time, please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." So David makes a case for himself and asks for help. He says, "Look, man, we have been really good neighbors. You know, we've been over here at the countryside, living next to you. Man, we've lived next to this buffet of sheep here, and we have left all of it alone. We have been great. We have not taken a single thing, though we could have by force, but we have not. And we've reached the time now where I've got 600 warriors here, and they are getting really hungry, and things are getting pretty dire. And we're just wondering, man, is there anything that you can do right now to help? Is there anything that you could do, Nabal, to help?" Look at verse 9. When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message, and in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servant, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse?" He knew exactly who he was. "Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shears and give it to men coming from who knows where?" Again, Nabal knows exactly who David is. He not only rejects David, but he does so in an incredibly disrespectful, demeaning way. And he may be used to treating people this way, but listen, David isn't used to being treated this way. So look at verse 12. David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, "Each of you strap on your sword." So they did, and David strapped on his as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. So David is really angry. People have identified and articulated 4 different levels of anger. There's annoyance, frustration, hostility, and rage. I'm guessing before we got to this place with Nabal, David has been hovering somewhere between frustrated and hostile. He's living with 600 men in the wilderness, in caves, on the run for his life, and 600 men are getting hungry and on edge. Then this happens. And he shoots up to level like whatever strap on your sword is, that's where he's at. David is raging. So he's angry. Now listen, the Bible doesn't say don't be angry. But what it does say is in your anger, don't sin. And what we read here is that there are some crossroads that we kind of come to in our anger where a decision needs to be made. Like, which direction are we going to go in our anger? And the first one is this: are we going to react or are we going to respond? Will you, in your anger, react or respond? David here, he reacts. As soon as he hears this news, he immediately reacts with, strap on your swords, men. We are going to deal with this. Now, David reacts in very aggressive, angry way. He is overheating, and you're going to know about it. Some of you, you're like that in your anger. You tend to be identified by your angry. You'll raise your voice and scream and shout, and there will be colorful language. You'll punch things, break things, throw things. Some of you are angry, and this is how you respond. Others of you, you're angry, but you're not aggressive in the same way. You're passive aggressive in your anger, meaning without affection, without encouragement, or even words for people. You don't invite, you don't include, you're not asking others. You just play it off like you just forgot. You're not even dealing with it. And this is the passive aggressive move. And here's what I can tell you. The passive aggressive anger move, it's sad because this is the favorite approach of most Christians. Because you can be mean with a smile on your face. You can treat people in a way that is really harsh, but you still have some kind of out because, well, you weren't mad. I wasn't angry. You could, you hide behind these things. And there's a lot of different key phrases that we could pull out that people try to use. One of my favorites is this. The passive aggressive statement of this, like, hey, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but, and the but means, hey, I'm about to say something that you're going to take the wrong way. And so often the response is, oh, okay, well, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but, and it's this back and forth ridiculousness. Some people, they get really sarcastic when they're angry and they're being passive aggressive. Some people stonewall, they just shut down. They ignore people. It's the silent treatment. And in many ways, I think the silent treatment is the cruelest expression of anger. Like, I know you don't think you're angry. I know in those moments you don't think you're behaving angry because in your mind, that's not what anger looks like. But it truly is. In your anger, you stonewall, you shut down, and you make everyone else pay the price as you ignore them. Well, I'm just not going to say anything that I shouldn't say. You're angry. I think this is one of the challenges of dealing with anger. Oftentimes, people don't think that the way they're dealing with their feelings is what anger looks like. They've got something else in mind. So they go, well, I'm not an angry person. I'm not dealing with anger. Those things are anger responses. This isn't anger. When all of it is. David reacts. He reacts with harsh, immediate, strap on your swords. And him and 4 other men are on their way to Nabal to deal with this situation. The scripture would point out that a thoughtful response, that a response to the situation is really what is called for. That we don't react, we consider, and we respond appropriately. The Bible doesn't call us to know anger. It actually specifically calls us to slow anger. This is what James says in James 1:19. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. It is a measured response, not the quick reaction. So David, again, 400 of his men who are angry are headed for Nabal. Meanwhile, in verse 14, we read this. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greeting, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time they were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day, they were a wall around us. The whole time they were herding our sheep near them. I mean, they were protecting us. Nothing harmed us. Now, think it over, Abigail, and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. And this is the problem with angry people. Nabal's angry. And the people around Nabal, they don't feel like they can talk to him. Like Nabal is an angry person as well. He's dealing with rage. He's dealing with these feelings. He's hostile. These are his responses. And you notice the servants, they don't feel like they can talk to him. And the same is true for you. If you're dealing with anger, trust me, there are people around you, maybe even in your own home, that don't feel like they can talk to you. Why? Because you're so sensitive and you overreact at everything. You might say, well, nobody's ever told me I'm sensitive and overreact. Right, because you're sensitive and you overreact. And this is the challenge. For people who really do care about angry people, they're in such a tough spot because they want to help. But they also don't want to get run over by your harsh reactions and anger when they try to lovingly approach you and say, I see a problem, because you just fly off the handle. This is exactly what Nabal's servants see and are dealing with. And so they go to Nabal's wife, Abigail, and Abigail seems to know exactly how David is going to react to her husband. So here's what she does. Look at verse 18. Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 shias of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. And she told her servants, go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband, Nabal. Abigail is brilliant. The first thing she does is she sends servants ahead of her with food. This is a really good decision, right? She knows these men are hungry and angry, a horrible combination. So she sends food ahead of any conversation, ahead of any kind of talking, right? You've been there before. You've been hangry, right? That combination of hungry and angry. And you know what helps that a lot? Chips and salsa, right? When you're hungry, I think oftentimes after church, it's been a long morning, it's afternoon now, you're getting, and look, before we even look at a menu, before we do anything, can we just get some chips and salsa? And all of a sudden, like, all the tension, okay, we got a little something to snack on before. I know the main meal's coming. I know there's other things coming, but like, this just helps a bunch. And this is exactly what Abigail does. She sends chips and salsa ahead of any kind of conversation that's coming. Verse 20. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending towards her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness, so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good." So many things here. And here's why David is angry. Did you catch it? David sees this as an injustice. I've been good to him. I've treated him so well, and he has been evil to me in return, and that's not right. And maybe you've gone down this road as well. Look, I was kind, I was generous, I was thoughtful, I was patient with them, and this is how I'm retreated, or this is how I'm treated in response? Are you kidding me? This is how you're going to treat me? And what we think is, it's a righteous anger. And listen, the Bible actually talks about righteous anger. But you know how the Bible talks about righteous anger? Righteous anger isn't when we are personally offended. Righteous anger is actually when we're angry on somebody else's behalf. Jesus gives us the perfect example of this, right? He was never angry about how he was personally treated. Jesus goes, he got angry when somebody else who was vulnerable was mistreated, when the religious elites, the rich, the powerful, when they use their position, their influence, their pride, their power to make somebody else feel small, feel weak, to take advantage of them, to make them feel less than what God created them to be. That's righteous anger. So a good spiritual test of maturity would be to examine your anger. What are you getting angry about? Are you angry because of how you've been treated? The injustices you've experienced? Or are you getting that angry because somebody else who is weak, who is vulnerable, who couldn't protect themselves, is being mistreated? That hurt person was being hurt greater. That broken person was experiencing further injustices because somebody else was taking advantage of. And that's what you're angry about. See, that's righteous anger. And it's different. So Abigail is coming up on David, and he is believing he is in this righteous anger position. I was good to you. You were evil to me. It's unjust. And so I'm reacting. Strap on your swords. And you see what else? David's rehearsing what's been going on, right? When David is coming down, he's just been saying, man, it's been useless. I did this. They did this. He's rehearsing everything that's been going on. Look at verse 23. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. What's she doing? She's doing what's really hard when someone in your life is really, really angry and overreacting. She humbles herself. Look at verse 24. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal, my husband. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him." What's she saying? Please, David, don't react. She is going to continue in her approach with David. She is going to try to help David see a bigger picture than just this one moment. I know you're angry right now, David, but what you do in this moment is going to follow you for the rest of your life. The story that will be told about you today, how this story goes, will be determined in this moment. What you do right now will determine the story that's told. Look at verse 28. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting destiny for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battle, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Jump down into verse 31. Don't let this be a blemish on your record. Then your conscience won't have to bear the staggering burden of needless bloodshed and vengeance. The second crossroads we come to in the vehicle of anger is this: will I rehearse or will I reflect? Will I replay what was said, what was done, or will I reflect on it and respond appropriately? David, again, he's been rehearsing. Man, this is what this fool of a man, he did to me. This is what he said to me. I can't believe. I mean, I pictured, I was right here. We had the opportunity to do this. And so I sent the men, and like here, he's rehearsing every little detail. And listen, this is what we do as well, don't we? It's like we have this recorder in our brain, and we just keep hitting play. And we play that scene over and over and over and over again. The things said to us, the lies said to us, the record of betrayal, the injustice, and we get angry and we hit play again and again and again. Maybe even in slow motion to make sure that we capture every moment. We hit rewind and play it again and again. And listen, some of you do this because you're afraid of what will happen if you stop hitting play. Like, what if I don't keep hitting play over and over? I might forget it. And if I forget it, doesn't that mean that they got away with it? So David he's rehearsing it. He's going over it. He's having the hypothetical argument with himself in his mind, in his heart. He's playing it all out. And Abigail is going to ask him to stop rehearsing it, stop replaying it, and reflect. Think for a minute, David, about the bigger picture. And David, why don't you stop for a second and think about why you're feeling this way? I understand that you're upset, but you have an entire army with you. And you're going to wipe out this guy and everything he owns simply because he didn't grant you the request with the right attitude? David, where's this coming from? This is coming from somewhere else. This kind of response for what happened doesn't make sense. Maybe he has something to do with what David's been dealing with before this, right? Maybe all this has to do with the fact that King Saul has been chasing him all over the country trying to kill him. And David is so frustrated with Saul, but he can't kill him. I mean, Saul is God's chosen first king of Israel. He's not going to go kill him. He's going to let God handle that in his time. But seriously, God, like, how long? He keeps coming after me. How long do I have to endure this? I'm on the run and this is crazy. So what's David doing? David is transferring his anger from King Saul onto Nabal. I can't do anything about this situation over here, but I most certainly can do something about this over here. And what's happening is a transfer of anger. And listen, most of you who are dealing with anger, that's what you're dealing with. There are areas of your life where you are powerless to do something about. And so in other areas of your life, you overreact with rage that's unnecessary. So listen, most of your anger, moms, most of your anger, dads, have nothing to do with your kids. They're just being kids. They make messes. They break things. They mess things up. They're loud at the wrong times. They don't say please and thank you. But you're losing your mind with them simply because you can. There are other areas of your life and other people in your life that are actually causing your anger, but you can't do anything about those people and those things. And so as soon as your kids do something to frustrate you in any way, you blow up. Because they won't listen to me, they won't behave, they won't obey. Oh, you won't? I can certainly make you obey. And in that moment, you blow up, you try to control the situation, and for a small window of time, you feel like you've regained control over situations that you had no control over. And here's how I know that that's what's happening for you, because I've been right there where you're at. I've been in that living room in my own home, dropping nuclear bombs on my boys and wife because I've been frustrated about something or someone else. And the minute they disrespect me, the minute they don't do what I thought they did, or simply spill something, I have lost my mind, and it had nothing to do with them. Like nobody else in my life will listen to me, but by God, you will, or you will feel my wrath. I've been there. I've been there. And maybe it's not your kids, but we see it all the time in a whole lot of other things. We'll take it out on tools, on elevator buttons that won't come fast enough. Like we'll take out on the steering wheel for traffic. We will choke the steering wheel like it's alive. We will take out our anger on other things when those things have nothing to do with what's really going on. And this is exactly what Abigail calls David to reflect on. David, your response to what just happened doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. You're about to lay waste to this guy and generations and all of this because he wouldn't simply grant you a request. David, pause and reflect on what is it that you're actually angry about. So interesting, this psalm that we're looking at, because David just goes on this rant. But there's this little verse where he is actually vulnerable in it. Psalm 109, verse 22, he says this, "For I am poor and needy, and my heart is full of pain." Here's the thing about an angry person. They may not know it, but they're like David, full of pain. They're hurt. And I'm sure you've heard the expression, and it's true, hurt people hurt people. I've seen it over and over when people are disproportionately responding to me, to other people. Somewhere in the mix is hurt feelings. It's a heart full of pain. And as you think through your own heart and life, as you pray about this issue for yourself, pray and ask God to show you those areas of hurt. Another thing Abigail does here is she brings God into the conversation at least 7 times. She speaks of God's plan and God's protection. I'll give you an example, verse 29. Even when you are chased by those who seek to kill you, your life is safe in the care of the Lord your God, secure in his treasure pouch. But the lives of your enemies will disappear like stones shot from a sling. What she's doing is brilliant. She is using a metaphor and drawing from another moment in David's life when he was standing before a giant and he reached into his pouch and pulled out stones, and God protected him, and God will protect him now. God protected you then. He's going to protect you now. God, you can, or David, you can trust God to handle this situation for you. And so the last crossroads we meet in our anger is this: will you rage or will you release? Will you rage or will you release? Will you release it to God? And when I say release, I don't mean that you somehow mysteriously let it go into the universe and you let go of the negativity or some ridiculousness like that. No, what you do is you do what David did. You say to God, God, this is exactly how I'm feeling. God, this is how I want to react. I don't want to respond appropriately. I want to call in an airstrike on this guy, on his house. God, this is what I want to do. This is exactly what Psalm 109 is. Remember what I said as we started this message today? Remember what I said? David is a very powerful warrior. He is in a huge power position, 600 fighting men with him. David could have done every single thing he asked God to do in this prayer. He could have killed Nabal. He could have wiped out his family. He could have done everything that he asked God to do. But what is David doing? David is releasing those emotions to God. God, this is what I'm feeling. God, this is what I want to do. But I'm not going to handle it. I need you to handle it. God, this is what I want to do, but you deal with it. How's the story end? Let's look at it, verse 32. David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands." Verse 35. Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, "Go home in peace. I have heard your words and grant your request. I will not kill your husband." So when Abigail gets back home, she finds a party going on at her home. Nabal has thrown this party, her husband, and at this point he is completely wasted, drunk, and so she doesn't talk to him that evening, but waits till morning. Verse 37. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. His servant went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David has sent us to take you to become his wife." Abigail quickly got on a donkey and became his wife. Let me close with a couple thoughts here. David's power steering is going out. David is overheating. But what happens? God uses Abigail to pull that vehicle over and to take a breath. Not just react, but to reflect on the bigger story going on around him. To help him release his anger over to God and not just rage. David invites God right into his anger. And he says, "God, here's how I want to handle this, but you deal with it, not me." And here's how Psalm 109, a very angry psalm, here's how it ends. Not in anger anymore. Psalm 109, verse 30. "But I will give repeated thanks to the Lord, praising him to everyone, for he stands beside me, the needy, ready to save me, ready to save them from those who condemn them." And watch this. In his prayer, David moves from rage and anger to worship as he surrenders his emotions over to God. Listen, I don't know what vehicle you're traveling in, what emotion you're struggling with, What I do know is what you need to do. Whatever emotion that, as we've been going through this series, whatever emotion, whatever vehicle you find yourself traveling in, here's what you need to do. You need to pull it over and you need to invite Jesus in. Trust me, he's okay with the minivan of shame. He's okay with the sidekick of stress. He's okay with the Mazda 3 of busyness, the Buick of sadness, the Cutlass Sierra of anger. He is not picky. You don't need to upgrade your vehicle to invite him in. He wants to meet you right where you're at, right there in the middle of the ugly emotions you're dealing with, right in the middle of your mess. He wants to come in. He's not scared of what you've been driving and what you've been rolling in. But there's one request. There's one caveat. As you invite him in, he demands the driver's seat. Jesus wants to take over driving your life. And I know it's scary to invite him into all of that ugly, but listen, here's what Jesus does. He gets in and he takes the driver's seat and he leads you down roads of healing. And he redeems those emotions and he takes you from where you're at into places that you never thought possible. He leads you to grace as he shows you his love, and there is healing and renewal. There's greater dependency on him, and you begin to make the same transition that we just saw David make. You go from sadness to worship. You go from anxiety to worship. You go from anger to worship. You go from all of these things to worshiping him. And in this place, he shows you roads that you never thought possible. But it starts right here, right now, by pulling over that vehicle of your emotions and inviting Jesus in. I know through this last couple months, as we've been dealing with all kinds of emotions because of COVID-19 and then just the regular stresses of life, this has been an incredibly timely sermon to just evaluate our own feelings. I want to invite you today. If you're a Christian, maybe you've been hiding some of those emotions. Maybe you've just not been honest about how you felt because you felt like those were the wrong things. I shouldn't feel this way, so I feel guilty about feeling that way, so I can't deal with them, and I don't want to talk about them. Listen, just pull it over. Get out of the driver's seat. Let Jesus drive. Repent. Turn to him, and he's going to take you down that road further. If you're not a Christian and you're watching this today, maybe today is the day where you make Jesus Lord of your life for the very first time. And here's what that looks like. It's recognizing that you're no longer in the driver's seat. You invite Jesus to be Lord of your life by simply coming to him and praying to him. God, this is what I'm dealing with. This is who I am. This is what life looks like. And I'm not in control. And I want you to be in control. Jesus, I recognize you as Lord. I recognize that you died and paid the price for my sin so that I might know life eternal and life anew today. And I may not know everything of what that looks like and what that all means, but here's what I know today, right now. I want you Lord of my life. And listen, if that's you, I want to encourage you to email us at the church. Reach out and call the church line. I would love to talk with you, connect with you, and talk to you more about what it means to make Jesus Lord of your life. No matter where you are, no matter what you're dealing with, Jesus is big enough to handle it. I pray that you'll meet him right there today. Love you so much. Have a great day.